This podcast is made possible by Planful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the premiere of our third season of Planning Aces. On today's show, we'll be featuring FP&A insights and commentary of three finance leaders, including Dev Ahuja, CFO of Novelis, Alex Triplett, CFO of Appfire, and CFO Rick Rosenthal of Clara Analytics. This is Jack Sweeney, your co-host, along with performance management guru Brett Knowles, who will serve as co-host and resident thought leader as we seek to highlight the takeaways from our distinguished group of Planning Aces. We'll begin after this.
Hi, I'm Rowan Tonkin, Chief Marketing Officer at Planful, and we're a proud sponsor of CFO Thought Leader. At Planful, we're empowering teams just like yours to drive peak financial performance in every corner of your business. What sets Planful apart? We have purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. This means we can get you up and running within weeks, and it requires minimal IT involvement. So you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business in your key financial processes. Best of all, you can't outgrow us. We take the pain of growing away with an unmatched ability to scale with you. You have an endless runway with Planful. See why over 1,300 customers around the world choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to planful.com and see how you can make financial performance a team sport in your business.
Hi, it's Jack Sweeney, and I've been joined by Brett Knowles. Brett, no small talk. Let's get right to it. What did you make of our Planning Aces we'll be featuring this episode?
Yeah, so I think that the common theme, the topic of the day is the impact of organization design on FP&A. In other words, FP&A we think is a technical thing, but if we get the organization chart wrong, we just can't execute it as good as the process might allow.
Seems like very often the FP&A team seems more like a SWAT team, where the CFO will point them in any one direction, whether it's a M&A deal where they need some extra analysis, or a resource allocation time of year where they really want to drill down on something, or they need to embed certain FP&A people out in the field to help general managers make better decisions. But it doesn't seem like there's any formal organizational approach. Is that the wrong answer, or what would you tell me?
There's no right or wrong way. The underlying issue, I think, is that old story about the difference between something that's complicated and something that's complex. So I don't know, manufacturing a car, that's complicated. There's a whole bunch of parts you got to put in place to make it work. Bringing up a 2-year-old, that's complex. So, what that looks like is if I have a problem with a part when I'm manufacturing a car, I write up a new standard operating procedure. There's a new process I go through, and that will make sure that that part is no longer faulty ever again. And once that's in place and, deployed, that part will always fit correctly. And that complicated piece of equipment is easy to assemble. The other day, I was at my nephew's place, and his 2-year-old was running down the deck, and she fell. And of course, there's all sorts of yelling and screaming and tears and so on. And a lollipop solved that problem. Give her the lollipop, all of a sudden, doesn't hurt as bad. Everything's cool. About an hour later, wouldn't you know it, the same thing happens again. She trips on that darn deck, and she's busy crying. This time, the lollipop doesn't work. That's a complex problem where I can't put in just a standard operating procedure and be guaranteed it's going to work in every instance. And the dilemma is the FP&A world looks like it's complicated, but it's actually complex. Complicated would be, we send out that spreadsheet and everyone fills it in the correct way. We're using Anaplan and everyone, does their process. And I get equal quality results from every department. That would be if it's complicated, but it's not as complex. We've got people involved. We've got different levels of detail, different types of detail, and it's impossible to create that one spreadsheet that captures all that stuff. So in conjunction with the process, we need to have those interpersonal relationships. We need to be in a position where people feel comfortable sharing with us information that might be sensitive. They might think it discloses some problems in their area. Maybe it identifies some people that aren't performing well, but somehow or the other, we need to access that in the FP&A world in order to substantiate and build better plans. And if we don't have that interpersonal relationship, we end up solving a complex problem with complicated solutions, adding more standard procedures, and we never actually improve the quality. So this idea of talking about relationships as opposed to better formulas or better spreadsheets allows us to deal with part of the quality problem that we deal with day to day in a different way.
Well, and again, as these CFOs step into new roles, very often they're expected to help transform the organization in some way. And maybe it's about letting old processes give way as finance leaders attract and deploy new talent, and that talent can help develop the new processes or come up with better approaches to run the business. Right? There's sort of this give and take as companies mature. And to your point that if you have dated legacy processes and your talent meter is running low, the company will not perform well. Versus if you have dated processes, but qualified, good, competent people being brought into the organization, you're going to be on a more fruitful path because processes can change. People might be more challenging.
Oh, absolutely. I keep saying to my wife that if I bought myself a better set of golf clubs, my game would improve. And she normally chortles at that because she realizes the problem is not the golf clubs. My brother-in-law, who's also a southpaw, he can take my same crappy clubs and shoot 20 shots less than I do. And in the FP&A world, it doesn't matter how good you make your processes. If you still have a lousy swing, you're still going to get lousy results. And so, what you just described is a model that says we need to bring in better people and they'll build better processes. Well, what if the processes were darn good enough? It's only the people we needed to fix. It's like my golf clubs. I don't need to fix the golf clubs. I need to fix a person at the end of the golf clubs.
I like that. Fixing people. It's kind of an interesting turn of phrase, but it's really not about fixing people. It's about developing them correctly in the first place. And it occurs to me in some of the conversations, I should mention too, that Planning Ace, this episode, we have Ahuja, CFO of Novelis, the aluminum company. You'll learn more about that in a short while. Talks about how people development and developing his next leaders are really an important challenge he believes he faces going forward in FP&A as well. But developing people and FP&A people in the age of AI seems to be a particularly challenging task. Would you agree, or
Well, let me give you a different swing at it using a different metaphor. I think that these cars which are coming out now that are ever smarter, I mean, my darn car is definitely smarter than I am at this point in time, but I think the smarter cars are making dumber drivers. And here's my hypothesis that in the good old days, back when I learned how to drive, there was none of these sensors and stuff. You had to do shoulder checks and be cognizant of who's in your blind spot. And your head's always on a pivot trying to see what's going on. These days, people are ignoring that stuff. They're waiting for the sensor to tell them there's someone in the blind spot or that they're too close to the curb or whatever, they're veering off the line. They should be stopping for a coffee break. And so people stop thinking. They're waiting for the car to tell them what the next move is. And I think another way to tell the story is we run the risk, if we keep on building these AI elements inside of our FP&A processes, that we may not necessarily be building a better FP&A process. We may be making, the net user dumber. Now, maybe we can build enough AI in that it doesn't matter. Like eventually Tesla's built cars that self-drive, but it's that transitional period where we end up making bad mistakes. And I think we're in that transition phase, but we're early, where our AI is not good enough to compensate for having great people. So yes, as our FP&A processes change, or FP&A capabilities change, needs change, we need to add better processes. But again, the conversation we keep coming back to is we also need good people.
Well, Brett, let me tee up our first planning ace, who will be CFO Dev Ahuja of Novelis. Now, Dev had a long career with Novartis, more than 15 years. He was a unit CFO and a geographic CFO in multiple parts of the world. So he has really a global resume. Novelis is a really interesting company. Did you know? Novelis, it is the leading producer of flat-rolled aluminum products and the world's largest recycler of aluminum. Anyway, there you have it. We were talking to Dev about his FP&A organization and how he's organizing finance. Here's what he shared with us.
So we had a very well set structure. I did not need to question the structure. It was like a corporate and a regional structure, which kind of was working then and is working now. But I think that what I brought in was some renewed focus on a couple of areas. So let me talk about two. One is, how does finance show up to the business? Is finance doing more of reporting, spending a lot of time on producing statements, data, numbers, or are they playing a prominent enough role in having a seat at the table in driving decisions, in pushing value levers? And I think that on the latter, finance has a strong seat on the table today. Finance has become a much bigger thought partner, participating, playing a role in shaping strategy, in shaping outcomes. That is one thing that we have been able to move the needle on. The other thing is focus on people pipeline. And I think that we have really done a lot of good work in enriching the talent pipeline. I personally spend a lot of time in really looking at where are my leaders going to come from 5 years down the line, 6 years down the line? How's my line of succession looking to my direct reports? Are we having enough depth of talent? So as a team, my leadership team and myself, we do spend a lot of time in making sure that we are deepening the organization, creating a bench so that we are able to move people, and we don't have situations where somebody who deserves to move to another job or a higher job is not able to do so because there is no succession. So I think that if there are two areas where we have moved the needle, it is this. I spoke about pushing value levers. I think that that there is some credit that goes to the finance organization in the way we have been able to enhance the profitability and results of the company. I mean, doubling EBITDA is not an accident. It has been a strong partnering between the business leaders and the finance leaders coming together to prioritize, allocate resources. Capital allocation is a big deal for us. We are a very capital-intensive company, and if you don't make the right investment decisions, things can go very badly wrong. So if you invest wrongly, it can derail you completely because these are big investments. And if they don't turn out to be right, it has consequences. But not investing has consequences because you don't grow. So finding that right balance of where do I prioritize and put my capital, I think that I have played a role in that. Both organically, we have done a big acquisition, inorganically as well. So, that has been something that, I have influenced, and my team has influenced together with all the business leaders in the team.
Now, before I forget to mention, our episode featuring CFO Dev Ahuja of Novelis will be released Sunday, August 6th. A standout episode. You won't want to miss, if I do say so. But Brett, what did you make of what Dev shared with us?
Well, I thought it was interesting because, of course, he touches on the great successes his teams had and the organization in total just by bringing different thinking to the table. But his most interesting comment, I thought, was, early in his career there, he asked himself the question, how does finance show up? How are we perceived at the leadership table? And I've certainly seen some organizations where finance is just seen as, the scorekeeper, and they've got to do some regulatory crap that we don't really, want to spend much time on, but do your plans and we can get back to our real jobs. And he's trying to figure out how to make it a seat at the table. And his decision was to focus on the people at the table, and his understanding that he's, in addition to actually getting the transactions done, he's got to build a leadership pipeline, a process by which people can emerge as leaders, develop their skill sets, and help run the business. And he talks about other activities in there like succession and so on. But the trigger event was, sitting in that room like a fly in the wall, looking at how finance is perceived and using that as a catalyst to evolve his teams.
One of the things I'd like to mention is that during our interview, and in fact, recently, we took a video clip of Dev Ahuja and circulated it on LinkedIn, and it got hundreds, perhaps over 1,000 views. He's simply sitting at a table talking to you, and it's almost as if you're sitting across the table from him. At least that's how it struck me. And I would just say that there is no doubt you are sitting across from a leader. And I think at times leadership is something that's really hard to it's hard to put your finger on what distinguishes leadership, but whatever it is, he's got it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and he also, he's good at the card tricks. So what's interesting is he points out that the business he's in with processing aluminum is very capital intensive. You have to make huge investments. Now they've got, many, 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 many years to pay back. His ROI is not, our 18-month window. But he says you got to be really careful how you invest because there are long-term consequences. And then he did this brilliant segue from that heavy capital intensive equipment to people. And he said, we need to keep on investing. And if we don't invest, there are consequences. And he sort of drew a light parallel between, buying that equipment that you make this long-term commitment to and has a long payoff period, and investing in our people that you make this long-term commitment to and has a long-term payoff. And so it's interesting that he's sort of applying the logic that we use in the business in working on the business.
Well, I'm afraid we've got to jump to our next planning ace, who is Alex Triplett, CFO of Appfire. Now, Appfire is a SaaS company. It supplies an enterprise collaboration software to its customers. So much of what's happening in finance, of course, is collaborative today. So I think Alex clearly excels in this area of collaboration, and our conversation touches on it quite a bit in our episode. But let's play the clip. This is Alex Triplett.
we had no FP&A department, and so we now have a team. It is 3 people. I hired somebody specifically that had been doing FP&A at public companies before, because part of really what I wanted was rigor in the budget process, rigor in budget versus actuals, someone who had seen scale and seen complexity, and knew how to adopt tools, and also knew how to engage business partners, because part of what we have FP&A doing is really driving business behavior by giving information to our business leaders. So the CMO and the head of channel and customer success and the head of people and whomever else, looking at spend versus actuals, and making sure that we are really open with how things work in their organizations as they grow them, as they add tools or they add people or they make changes, but how that affects the P&L, and then making them involved in the numbers. And so he's been amazing at that. And then the 2 folks under him are really focused on budgeting, forecasting, producing the monthly board packs, and doing those, with rigor, on time, continuing to approve. So we stood up an FP&A function, and I keep it a little bit separate from main finance. So I've got a VP finance who essentially is my chief accounting officer and soon will be, who is my right hand. He's amazing. He manages 27 of the 30 people, and then FP&A is still directly under me as a 3. And then my FP&A leader and my chief accounting officer, they work hand in glove.
Well, some organizational insights there along the way. I should mention Alex's episode. Was episode 910 of CFO Thought Leader. Brett, what did you make of what Alex shared with us?
His was an interesting story because it was about the metamorphosis, from having a finance department and adding in the FP&A. And how do you add it in? And how do you create an environment where it can nurture and grow? And so his comment was, I've got finance and they're separate, and I've got the FP&A people that still directly report to me. The part that I thought was interesting is he said his accounting team was about 27 people. I had to go back and look up Appfire and figure out, why the heck they had so many accountants. Don't know the answer to that. But what is interesting is they have a lot of manpower, person power around finance, 27 people, without any FP&A capability. And to me, that seems like somehow or the other, the company survived longer without that FP&A function than I would have expected. And then when he brought it in, it's still a fair size. I think he said it was 3 or 4 people. So investing a fair amount and creating that environment to nurture it. So I thought it was just an interesting story of how it is an FP&A capability emerges.
And meanwhile, another excellent communicator, which that set of skills, I think, is often derivative of being a successful FP&A. You acquire it on the way up as you try to do your best to explain what your analysis is revealing. Would you see things differently?
You're right. That's another part of the social construct of FP&A. It's not enough that you've got good processes. You do need to be able to communicate well and clearly. Like, you've got to connect with people in order for us to get them to do the work that we need them to do on our behalf. Like, you can't do FP&A on your own. You need participants from every department to help out. And if you haven't motivated them and inspired them, they don't put in the effort, you don't get the quality, and consequently, you can't achieve the goals you want.
Well, let's hear our final planning ace, who will be Rick Rosenthal, CFO of Clara Analytics. Rick, not unlike Alex, stepped into his role and had to build out a finance function. This is CFO Rick Rosenthal.
So we are a Series B company, relatively lean team. I've kept most of the team intact. and the structure right now as is. But what I have done is I've built out our long range plan, which gives us our North Star, because it helps me get to understand what are the real drivers of the business, which functions help drive performance, who are the main customers that are driving performance, what are the triggers, what are the drivers that we should be focusing our attention on in order to have revenue grow, ensure it's growing profitably. It's just been based on my experience. It's a great way to understand the business when you're new to it. It's a great way for the cross-functionally for folks to, again, align on a plan and a vision. Don't be afraid to ask questions. No company is perfect. There's a reason they brought you in as the CFO. And a lot of times companies suffer from inertia, right? Something was established years ago and it's just become the routine. So don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge the status quo, and even make suggestions on ways to improve. I gave the example earlier on about purchasing AWS spend on the spot market and questioning, why are we doing this? Is there an opportunity to purchase more upfront and save significant money? So that's some of the advice I'd give. And also build a great relationship with one or two of your board members. I think it's great to bounce ideas off of them, get their advice. That's really been helpful for me as well.
All right. Well, thank you to Rick Rosenthal, CFO of Clara Analytics. Rick was on episode 907 of CFO Thought Leader recently. I liked his North Star analogy. He's referring to the long range plan. But you told me earlier you thought he rounded out the episode or rounded out the overall theme of this episode. Why?
Because as we listen to Alex, he's building FP&A from nothing, whereas Rick has stepped into an existing organization. And one of the temptations always is when you join an organization to blow things up and rebuild it the way that you want it built, or rebuild it the way that you had your last organization. And he makes a point of saying, he worked hard to keep everything intact. But what he did do is deal with the inertia. So he didn't say, I need to move people around, but rather, let's make sure that we question how we do things. Let's not just do it this way because we always did it this way. So again, it's back to don't need to worry about changing the processes. Let's focus on the people. And the people, let's not just, what's that expression, rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. Let's actually figure out what part of the process needs some focus and what does that look like. I think the second part that was interesting, and so, that first part is just, work with people to figure out what part is necessary, what part is just tradition. The second part, though, is something I haven't heard before, and that is he began leveraging members of the board for those members' expertise. So normally the board is what I'm going to call a push system. They push ideas onto the organization, or they push structure. And he's moved it into a pull. He's gone to the board and he's trying to pull ideas from them. So I'm supposing he looked at the board people's profile and identified several that had skills or experience that was of interest to him. He went specifically to those board members and tried to pull from them ideas. And I think we forget about the board as being that kind of resource. And to me, I thought that's interesting. We're here talking about human capital, how we manage the knowledge base that we have, and using the board as another member of the team is pretty clever.
I guess it might depend on the board member. I guess it might depend on the board, but certain CFOs might be not as eager as others to involve the board in certain types of issues, no doubt.
There's two parts to it. One is that old adage, careful what you ask for because you might get it, right? You ask for advice, you might not want it. But the other part that people have fears about is there is a fiduciary accountability on the part of the board. And if they discover something's broken or not working correctly, even though you've consulted with them to get their support, Nonetheless, they still have to report you to the cops. Like they are accountable for making sure that if something's broken that they find out about, that it's passed along. Otherwise, they've got legal liability. So it becomes difficult to use them as a resource in some instances, especially in areas where you think that there might be some non-compliance or regulatory issues beneath the problems that you're coping with, because although they could be an ally based on their experience, because of their legal responsibilities, they actually, they're part of the gatekeeper whistleblower organization that you might not want to disclose some things to them.
Again, private equity investors as well. Complicated relationship. Yeah.
Right, because they've got that third bat, which is financing, right? So in other organizations, the board members are chosen for their specific deep expertise in that area. I bring in lawyers, I bring in bankers to get the lawyer or banker perspective of the board. Many times with these PE firms, the people on the board, or your PE supported organizations, the people on the board aren't there because they've got technical expertise. They're there because they're financiers. And again, that's sort of the third bat that they can beat us up with if they find out things that they're not comfortable with. So it's not a general statement. Always look at your board as a resource you can use. There's these 3 mitigating circumstances that you might want to consider when you think about what problems or issues you might consult with them on.
Well, thank you again, Brett Knowles. You've supplied us once again with plenty of bonus insights along the way here. As we wrap things up, just curious as to overall thoughts on the 3 that we featured and the common ground they share.
I think the ribbon I would draw around our conversation today is it actually doesn't matter what phase of maturation your organization's in, whether it's an old organization and you're new to it, it's a new organization and you've been around for a long time, whether the FP&A process doesn't exist or and you're creating it, or does exist and you're refining it. In all phases, being super aware of not only your own staff and how they work together, but the broader organization and how they work with FP&A has a significant impact on your ability to get the FP&A tasks done. And we chose this career because we're technicians. We love the methodology, the process, and how numbers work together. We just need to be careful we don't forget that it's the people that make those processes and numbers actually work. And, let's keep our eye on that ball at the same time. And if we have a problem, don't immediately assume it's a broken process and I add in a new standard operating procedure, right? That's the complicated versus complex thing. Let's go back and figure out what it is that can get us the fastest payback and the best effective use of resources. And it might not be adding a new standard operating procedure. It might be doing an offsite with your team.
Nice. Once more, thank you, Brett Knowles. I actually thought we were going to have to record this session with you from the Red Carpet Club or some airport corridor somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, in fact, I just got back late last night. So I'm now enjoying a couple of days in the office where we can catch up with important things like expense reports.
And you're staying clear of the Canadian forest fires up there?
Ironically, I was in Calgary the first half of this week, and when we landed, it was like so thick you couldn't even see downtown from the airport when we landed. But had a huge thunderstorm that night. Next day was nice and sparkly clean. So obviously that storm just blew all that crap down to those evil Americans below us.
Ha! Thanks a lot. Regardless, safe travels, sir. For Planning Aces, this is Jack Sweeney with Brett Knowles. Thank you for listening.